Hello, fellow and future saxophonists. This is Tulane Akinjile of PlaySaxNow. And what I want to speak to you about today is how hard is it to play the saxophone? Now, I want to actually start off this video with some general considerations, about playing the saxophone in general. Then I want to split those of you starting the saxophone into two groups. Those who've had some form of musical training, whether formal or informal, and those who've had no musical training whatsoever. Now, I fully appreciate that this two group distinction does not apply to everybody, and that there are many of you who fall in both groups, or you feel that you fall in both groups. But I think that truthfully, if you look at people who are coming to play the saxophone for the first time as adults, they will actually fall distinctly in these two different groups. Those who actually know something about music, and actually have learned something. Those who've had no formal training, never did music in school, nothing like that, and they've come to the saxophone. Okay, with that being said, let's get into the idea of the general considerations when it comes to how hard is the saxophone. Now, I've actually put some notes down because I tend to, go on for a bit, so that I want to get it right. Now, when it comes to playing the saxophone seems to be really one of the harder instruments, as it were, to really get into and to be able to actually play well. Harder in the sense that we're looking at it from a musical instrument point of view, as opposed to maybe coming from nowhere, which I'll explain. So, the easier instruments would obviously be guitar and piano. Now, even though piano is very complicated when you get to the high level, in fact, all instruments get very complicated when you get to the high level. One of the wonderful things about both guitar and piano has to do with how you produce a note. On the guitar, you hit the fret, you strike the note. On the piano, you strike a key and you produce a note. And there are many, many, many very famous players who really and truly just using that method and learning a little bit have done very well. So those will be on the easier side to sort of get good at. And by get good at, I mean you're able to play a song or something like that sufficiently well enough to kind of wow an audience. Harder, obviously, look at saxophone, clarinet, flute. Oboe is interesting because of the tiny, tiny reed. And then hardest is, of course, all the brass instruments and the violin and strings, because at that stage you have to be able to hear the note in order to pitch it. So that makes it very difficult. That being said, saxophone also has interesting problems as a woodwind instrument because of its intonation. It is the closest musical instrument to the human voice, and as a result of that, the intonation of the saxophone is massively variable. So you can make virtually any sound you probably can imagine on the saxophone. Therefore, it's very difficult to play in tune. It's also a melody instrument, which is wonderful because it means you only have to worry about playing one note at a time, as opposed to a harmony instrument, which is violin, the strings, guitar, and piano, where you have to worry about playing chords. So it's only mainly used for solos and, of course, playing melodies. That being said, what makes it an interesting instrument is that it takes a long time to get to the level you want to sound like. And I say this up front because what I see happening for a lot of people who are taking up the saxophone is because the key work of the saxophone is relatively simple. And it's the same as the oboes and the flutes, clarinet being quite complicated when it comes to the key work, bassoon, another story entirely. People seem to feel to themselves, well, because we can actually play the keys, it will be easy to play. Well, no, because you actually have to put in some work. Not as much work to keep up your technique, what we call your embouchure, which is how you put the mouthpiece into your mouth and play. Not as much as your embouchure on a brass instrument. I also play trombone, and that's another thing entirely. But certainly enough for you to get to the stage where you're able to produce a sound which is pleasant. And the problem also is that many people start off playing the saxophone have heard top saxophonists playing, so they're aiming for that high level. So it always seems as though they're going nowhere. Anyway, let's go into two distinct groups of people who are going to come to it. Those who have some knowledge about music. So one of the things I think is good about that, is that you have some understanding of music theory. You understand musical concepts, which is huge, because as much as we hear music every day, what people don't realize is that the language, how music is played, all this is an entire different world in and of itself. So you get that. You also can read sheet music. And at this stage, it can really speed up your ability to find what you like, because you can get books and other things, read through them, and play. Another thing for you to look at is to look at finding and connecting with local ensembles. Go and look at the local music schools, and also go in and find out about what teachers are in your area, I, of course, have the PlaySaxNow Basics course, which is absolutely wonderful for you to get started on. It's written from two perspectives, and that's the positive side. I mean, the negative side, if you're coming from having some music knowledge is, and I've found this out when I've worked with clients, is that music is actually very badly taught. This is an important point, right? Saxophone itself is even more compounded by the fact that, in spite of the fact that 90%, in fact, I'll say 95% of the music out there is jazz, pop oriented, the actual teaching of the saxophone is very classical. So when you connect with your local conservatoire music school, you'll be hard pressed to actually find someone who wants to teach you some of the stuff you want to play, complicated solos, chords, piano, and this. And the reason why, to be fair, they don't want to do it is because they know it's a lot of work. I mean, this is it. I mean, the truth is that they don't really want to do something out there. Now, again, I get you started with the basics in my PlaySaxNow Basics course, but you may want to look at some other bits and pieces to actually expand your understanding. And most importantly, you must understand what you want to play. But this is something which is actually very good for you to get started in. I would encourage you to go ahead and get started playing the saxophone. And one other thing I have to point out is that for many who've learned music in the past, they've had a negative experience. So you need to work through that as well. And that could be a spur, because I've had people who have said that because they were not able to learn music when they were younger, or because of a negative experience, it spurred them on to push harder and go on to learn a musical instrument and make great progress because they're able to choose what they do as adults. I've had people where these issues which they had as children, young people, learning a musical instrument, this has caused them to, stagnate. And basically, they find the instrument hard to learn. They think it's their own fault, not realizing that it actually takes, regardless of which one you are, at least a good 2 years to make a good sound on the saxophone. Now, again, many people will argue with me that they could get good in a faster time, but I have to say that to be safe, and from what I know, 2 years will cover everybody. Those who may accelerate quickly and those who may seem to be slow learners. And many of the grizzled pros you see up there, people like Charlie Parker and the top jazz musicians, they were actually terrible when they got started. Charlie Parker especially so, had a cymbal thrown at him by a drummer who came to his hometown. So it will take time to sound good. So those are the considerations. You, however, may have an easier time plugging into, local music services, because all of them teach by reading sheet music. Whether that's your bag or that's what you want to do, I leave that up to you. But there's a lot of stuff available if you have a little bit of smattering of music knowledge on taking your saxophone playing forward, And of course, you can check out my PlaySaxNow Basics course, find out if that's a good fit for you. Okay, now let's go on to the next group. That is the person who has no musical training whatsoever and, wants to play the saxophone. Congratulations. You are about to play the most iconic, beautiful, controversial of all the instruments on the planet. And I say that with deepest and sincerest respect. Congratulations. Because the saxophone is one of those instruments where when you say you play it, it gives an instant reaction. I mean, guitar does, piano kind of, but saxophone definitely, because it's iconic. So here are some things to think about when you get started. In the beginning, don't necessarily worry about the music theory and all. Look at starting by playing by ear. I'm actually going to be releasing very soon a play by ear course, and I'm also working with a few stakeholders on a whole saxophone method by playing by ear. And I'll tell you that it's controversial for me to tell you this, but I'll tell you why. I mean, I played saxophone for 20 years. I believe, particularly if you're starting a musical instrument for the first time and you've got no knowledge about music, not only is the learning curve steep, because remember, you need to learn about musical concepts and all these other bits and pieces, but you will become extremely discouraged very quickly. Because what happens typically when I bring on adult learners who want to learn the saxophone but really don't have any foundation of music whatsoever, is they want to play the songs they love, they've heard on the radio, they've heard on pop, jazz, famous saxophone solos. And what they find is that they are being told that they have to do this massive amount of work, before they can even get to touch the instrument. Music theory, learning about bits and pieces, harmony, all these other concepts. Now, don't get me wrong, you will have to learn that. However, in the beginning, you want to actually get to playing as quickly as possible. So what you need to do is focus on jazz and popular songs which you like. Make a list of 50 songs that you like to go out and find out how to play these by ear. Again, I'll be releasing a lot of stuff about this. I also speak about it in the PlaySaxNow Basics program, where I speak about going up and down your saxophone, how to learn the basics of simple scales for you to get into playing the instrument. Now, focus on hanging out with people who are in the jam session, play by ear category, those who play folk musicians, pop musicians, and bands, and find a player that way. In fact, it's unfortunate for me to actually tell you this, but I've seen many players who've gone to a jam session and found a grizzled, saxophonist who doesn't read music, but he's been playing in bands for years, and they've made wonderful progress in under 3 years. And the reason really and truly is they're playing what they love to play. Now, again, I'm not discouraging you from learning music theory. I learned the traditional way. I went through the grades, almost went to the Royal College of Music before I sort of changed my path. But particularly when you're starting out, you need to really focus on getting to what you love quickly. And at the end of the day, whether you read music or not, you have to ask yourself, what do I really want to play on the saxophone? And these are the considerations. One of the wonderful things you have is that you're not necessarily jaundiced, you're an adult by previous music education, and you get to choose to play what you love to play. Of course, there is the issue of the steep learning curve, but again, it will be the same if you entered into any other hobby. So, in summary, the one thing you need to focus on, if you look at how hard it is to play the saxophone, if you have some musical knowledge, is focus on using the musical knowledge that you have to get into playing the saxophone. That way you're using your previous knowledge to get into playing it and finding out what you like and what you don't like. And once again, it is really about being very clear about your goals and what you want to do on the saxophone. This is crucially important. I've got a series about the 13 big mistakes that beginning saxophonists make. You can go through that. I also speak about that a lot, that you need to be clear on what your goals are for playing the saxophone. Now, if you have no musical knowledge whatsoever, congratulations. And I sincerely mean that. For wanting to take up the saxophone, focus on using what you love about the saxophone, the songs you love, what you love about the instrument, to get you into playing the saxophone. That's one of the best things that you can do. So, again, look and check out my 13 big mistakes that beginning saxophonists make series. And also, look at it this way and think about the saxophone from this perspective. The truth is this: we need you. And by saying we, I'm speaking about musicians and the saxophone community combined. Every year, in the UK at least, we lose 30% of musicians. A lot of it is said to be due to government sponsorship. A lot of it is said to be for many other reasons. But in truth, I think it's because for years and years and years, learning a musical instrument was extremely elitist, still is to this day. And as a result of that, fewer and fewer people are taking up playing a musical instrument. One of the best instruments you can play is the saxophone, because it has so much music in the popular and jazz repertory. and you can always find something in there that you like. So don't necessarily get discouraged with what I've said. It is better that you know the truth up front, that there's going to be some work required for you to play the saxophone relative to other instruments, and more importantly, that you settle in your mind that you're going to say, okay, definitely, I'm going to go for it. So if you like this video, make sure you like it, make sure you add some comments below, subscribe to my channel. I'm going to bring you more videos like this. And remember to play your sax now.